Welcome back. I'm Peter St. Honest. This is a weekly roundup of my daily videos on the economy and freedom, where I cut through the BS and lay out what the gaslighting clowns pulled out of their hats this week and what is coming next. Silver prices jumped 11% last Friday, bringing year-to-date gains to 166%. If you got silver in your stocking last year, you had a heck of a year. If you got gold, you're still up a tidy 71%. Bitcoin, of course, sat this one out. In fact, by sheer coincidence, after a blockbuster 2024, Bitcoin's down almost exactly the same as a lump of coal, clean, beautiful coal. So what's driving the silver craze? The proximate cause is a China export ban on silver starting January 1st, which matters because China mines 15% of all the silver in the world, but it refines 2/3 of it. But the bigger picture is silver is being driven by two things. Out-of-control government spending, which boosts silver's monetary premium. That's what did 71% for gold. But the second is obscene levels of silver usage from AI data centers, electric vehicles, solar energy, pretty much anything electric. This is because silver is the best conductor known to man, and it's very corrosion resistant, meaning it's the backbone of high reliability electronics. To put it in perspective, a single AI data center can use a half ton of silver, while a 300 megawatt solar project to power that data center can consume north of 3 tons. Multiply that by 504 major AI data centers being built and fully 8,200 solar projects in planning or construction. Then toss in electric vehicles, which use twice as much silver as a gasoline car and make up most of car sales in China. Line all this up against a paltry 25,000 tons of silver currently being mined, the solar projects alone would gobble it all. My friend Wall Street Mav, formerly Wall Street Silver, laid out the supply crunch for new mines. It's pinched because most silver is a byproduct of mining other metals, while it can take 10 to 20 years to build a new mine from scratch, and up to 5 years just to reopen a closed mine. Of course, all of those will have higher production costs. That's why the mine is not running today. The shortage has drained above-ground inventories by 77% this year. Companies like Samsung are locking up silver mines for years. Finally, unlike gold, a lot of silver is not recyclable because it is locked inside old electronics. It's not worth pulling apart the Nokia for a few grams. So as next, silver supply squeeze already sent it into so-called price backwardation twice this year. That normally happens once every 50 years. As for what's next, it boils down to, do you think government deficits will continue and inflation with them? And do you think AI and green energy, plus robots soon, will keep building? Both seem pretty safe bets, but still silver is famously volatile, about twice the stock market and 3 times gold. So since Nixon ended the gold standard in 71, silver's had 4 big rallies, went up 4-fold in the 1970s, 8-fold in the late 70s, 4-fold again in the early 2000s, and again in the 2008 crisis. Of those, 2 rallies crashed, giving back most of the gains. 2 rallies leveled off and kept rising. So 50-50 near term, but zoom out and buying at any of the tops of those rallies would have made you money. So silver may take a breather, but silver and gold have a lot more to run. While Donald Trump moves heaven and earth to deport illegals, Democrats and Republicans in Congress are issuing a stream of bills to allow more migrants into the country. At least a dozen this year, including a so-called Dignity Act, a DREAM Act, bills focused on farm workers, construction, and even a Bracero 2.0 Act for seasonal workers. The common thread is they claim to fill labor shortages. So this has it completely wrong because migrants do not fill shortages, they reshuffle shortages. We get too many low-skilled workers when we already have too many, and we get a precisely equal new shortage of high-skilled workers who clean their teeth, teach their kids, and do open-heart surgery. Now those are actually in short supply. To illustrate, let's say you annex Canada as the 51st state, Donald Trump's dreams come true. Now you don't instantly have millions of Canadians lined up looking for work, because they already have jobs in Canada doing stuff for other Canadians. Now, what if you skip the country and just import all the Canadians? Same story. Losing the land actually makes it worse. So day one, they're roaming around the bus station looking lost, but give it time, and they're still effectively occupied doing stuff for each other. Zero labor shortage solved, just more people. Now, in the case of Canada, it doesn't reshuffle wages because Canadians are similarly skilled to Americans, about 70% white collar. But if you import, say, Guatemala, it's very different. Now you have a massive oversupply of low-skilled migrants and a precisely equal shortage of high-skilled workers 1-for-1. Now, this is fantastic if you happen to be high-skilled. Million cheap nannies and lawnmowers, not a one who competes your wages down. In fact, they compete your wages up since the Guatemalans didn't bring any dentists with them. But it's rough if you are blue-collar, millions of low-skilled workers competing your wages to peanuts. Plus, you wait months to see a surgeon and your kids are packed 50 to a classroom that does not speak English. Now, to be fair, there is such a thing as a good reshuffle. You import high-skilled migrants, say hundreds of German surgeons or Japanese engineers, you get a healthy surplus of surgeons and engineers with a new shortage of low-skill workers to mow their lawns, make their Starbucks, and babysit their kids. Point being, immigration only works economically if you are cherry-picking the absolute best, say the top 0.1% of people who want to come here. Now, this is eminently doable, considering literally billions of foreigners want to come to America. Going by the natural experiment of Puerto Rico, where nearly 2/3 of the population has now emigrated to the mainland, extrapolate that to the rest of the world, and perhaps 5 billion foreigners would come here if we unwisely let them. So at sex, if low-skilled migrants contribute nothing, they simply shuffle wages while gobbling hundreds of billions in welfare. Why do we keep importing them? For Democrats, it's easy. They know low-skilled migrants are solid left-wing voters who can turn the entire country into an accelerated version of California, which was once conservative enough to elect Ronald Reagan, but now, thanks to migrants, is as blue as it gets. For Republicans, it's even simpler. Money. Donor money from industries that want cheap labor and leave taxpayers and Rust Belt communities with the fallout. A word from our sponsor. If you own gold, and many of you do, you already understand how it protects your wealth from the insanity coming out of Washington. The inflation, the recessions, the wars. But with monetary metals, there's a way to actually earn a yield of up to 4% on your gold paid in more ounces of gold. You retain ownership of real, allocated physical gold with no storage costs while your ounces grow every month outside the banking system. If you're serious about protecting your future and building your legacy, head to monetarymetals.com/Peter to get started. Now back to our show. With mere hours remaining in 2025, it is time to recap for those just tuning in. The year kicked off in fine style with Trump regaining the White House, saving us from 4 very long years of the cackles. On day one, he slammed shut the border that Sleepy Joe claimed could only happen with mass amnesty. Elon's Doge rampaged across a bloated Washington, targeting the trillion-plus of waste and fraud that's putting our children into debt slavery, and that apparently was funding quality clearing centers. Alas, our adventurers face sabotage by rhinos in Congress who turned decades of small government pledges into hundreds of billions in fresh theft. Still, the economy had a strong year, with growth in the final 6 months hitting 4% despite tariffs, deportations, and federal layoffs legacy media told us would cause a depression. Unemployment remained a pleasing 4.5% despite AI Armageddon. Millions of Americans re-entered the workforce, filling jobs vacated by illegals at twice the pay. Turns out Americans will do those jobs, just not for peanuts. In fact, jobs on the year were up nearly 2 million for Americans, and they slid almost 2 million for foreigners, which our lying media framed as a, quote, paralyzed job market. Alas, inflation did not do as well, dropping from Biden's nosebleed level, but still stuck at 3%, because Congress is addicted to spending trillions we don't have, in fact, 38 trillions, which comes to nearly $500,000 of national debt for a family of 4, the second mortgage you did not want. Wars were a mixed bag, unsurprising considering America's been at war all but 20 years out of 249. Still, Trump ended more wars than he started, which counts as a win in Washington. The big story for 25 was the exposure of massive corruption in government, starting with DOGE exposing tens of billions in fraud, both in government, like U.S. aid, and among the tens of thousands of so-called NGOs, non-government organizations, that pillage your tax dollars, then use them to lobby for left-wing policies, left-wing politicians, and, of course, lobbying for even more taxpayer funds. To the point nearly the entire institutional left is your tax dollars at work, from Somali leering centers to BLM riots. Of course, it goes deeper than money once Trump went to proper war with the federal bureaucracy, including for the first time in history, trying to fire a member of the Federal Reserve. This is now queued up a Supreme Court decision expected next June on a 1935 case called Humphrey's Executor that unconstitutionally shields deep state bureaucrats from the voters. If that gets overturned, Trump and any future president can finally restore voter control of the bureaucratic overlords FDR used to turn us from citizen to subject. Finally, and maybe most important, free speech. Elon saved free speech with his offhand Twitter buy, then Trump cemented it with his win. That's pulled us back from the abyss. 100 million Americans now see the corruption. This is destroying legacy media that was the intellectual bodyguard of the progressive takeover. We're seeing the fruits in young people going based even before they finish 12 years of government indoctrination or education. It's enough to give you hope. So as next, 2025 was the best year for liberty since Reagan, maybe since Andrew Jackson. There's a lot more work to do, but 100 million Americans are now eyes wide open and eager for battle. In 2026, I'm rolling out a new monthly recap for investors, including stock picks. Check it out at profsatanj.com, and Happy New Year. "2026 is here. Will last year's runaway growth continue? Or is legacy media correct and the Great Depression is nigh?" So for the economy, the three big dials for this year are GDP, inflation, and jobs. GDP meaning how fast the economy is growing, inflation meaning how fast Congress and the Fed are stealing your life savings, or managing the money supply, and jobs as in can Americans get work that pays. Starting with growth, these past 6 months have been among the best since the dot-com 1990s. A lot of that's been obscene amounts of money going into AI, echoes of dot-com, with an assist from a Congress that's halved spending growth compared to Biden, plus hundreds of deregulations from EPA to FinCEN that are queuing up hundreds of billions in output. But the big one for growth in 26 will be the trillions of investment pouring in largely from Trump's tariffs. Some were strong-armed from trade partners like the $350 billion Korea is promising, $550 billion from Japan, and $600 billion from the EU. Some are essentially tribute from Gulf countries currying favor with Trump, over $1 trillion each from Saudi, UAE, and Qatar. But the big one is trillions from foreign companies moving production inside America, inside the big, beautiful tariff umbrella. Japan did this in the 1980s with Reagan's tariffs, to the point nearly 60% of Japanese cars sold in America are made in America, which is almost as high as the big three American car makers who make 2/3 in America. Now, we won't know how many trillions till they break ground, but in recent speeches, Trump has been touting north of 10 trillion of investment. For perspective, in a normal year, investment runs about 4 trillion, and every additional trillion translates to about 1 million jobs. So 26 could be epic on the jobs front. Of course, there's risks. If the AI bubble pops, if foreigners renege, if the Supremes strike down tariffs, all that could evaporate, hence the watershed. Next up is inflation. Democrats, Republicans, and the Federal Reserve all seem to have quietly agreed that 3% inflation is the new normal after 40 years of pretending to aim for just 2%. Now, the Fed's been pimping 3 for decades now, since its job is to counterfeit money, but both parties are now on board since voters care a lot more about jobs than inflation, while cutting rates drives jobs in the here and now, with the inflation coming years later. So expect inflation to continue in 26. finally jobs. AI is finally starting to show up in the hiring numbers, specifically hitting recent grads with useless degrees. Happily, 2,000 years of technological unemployment, ever since oxes replaced farmers or water wheels replaced stonecutters, say the new jobs will come in services. So bartenders and personal trainers rejoice. Unhappily, the American economy is still mired in a swamp of regulation and tax. That means in a tech shock, we'll lose jobs a lot faster than new ones come. Ramping up deportations buys time, but we need to cut a lot more red tape and tax on small business. So as experts, odds are we get a boom in 26, albeit with ongoing inflation. With, call it, 1 in 5 odds, it gets ugly. So if you're invested, don't make any crazy moves. If you've got kids, give them human skills that survive AI. And if you're a voter, stay frosty. Washington is never your friend. A word from our sponsor. One of the best ways to secure your Bitcoin is with a hardware wallet, a physical device that lets you keep your coins offline without internet connection. One of the most trusted names in hardware wallets is CoinKite, maker of the famous block clock. CoinKite devices are made in Canada and they're run by passionate Bitcoiners who've been at this since 2012, back when Bitcoiners were trading in person at swap meets. You can pick up hardware wallets and plenty of other goodies at coinkite.com/ProfSaintAnge. That's CoinKite.com/ProfSaintAnge. Okay, back to our show. Somali daycare powerhouse Quality Leering Center has closed. If you need to leer your kids, you will need a new daycare. The nation is being seized by what Zero Hedge calls the Nick Shirley effect, as hundreds of citizen journalists fan out exposing what looks like tens of billions, perhaps trillions, of government fraud. What's been found so far focuses on the Somali community, where despite nearly 90% of these model migrants being on welfare, they've managed to set up tens of thousands of apparently fraudulent daycares, autism therapy centers, food for kids programs, and home health companies. To give a flavor, there's apparently one Somali healthcare company per 3 Somalis in the nation. Somali-run autism grants in Minnesota now run $399 million a year. That's up from $3 million 7 years ago. Somali child nutrition scams were actually prosecuted for $300 million stolen, after which even more scams sprung up while the city and state turned a blind eye lest anybody call them racist. So far, it comes to an estimated $8 billion of Somali fraud in Minnesota alone, roughly $250,000 per Somali household, meaning the roughly 65,000 Somali adults in Minnesota managed to steal more than the entire GDP of the nation of Somalia. So Saudi Arabia has oil, China has factories, Somalia has quality leering centers. Unfortunately, Somalis are just the tip of the iceberg. A new study found half of New York City is on Medicaid. Note, average income in New York City is $81,000 for the household. Nearly 40% of New Yorkers are foreign-born, meaning they are getting free care when the rest of us who pay for it shell out tens of thousands for insurance. A 2023 City of New York survey found foreigners, there's not foreign-born, but actual foreigners, occupy nearly a third of public housing and over 40% of rent-controlled and stabilized units in the city. California is even worse. The state auditor recently tallied $70 billion in fraud, including $2.5 billion of SNAP fraud and $24 billion in fraud for homelessness. The fraud industrial complex, of course, took off during COVID. The Small Business Administration estimates $64 billion in fraudulent PPP loans. Other estimates run to $8 billion. Given the median PPP loan was $20,000, that implies 4 million people should be in prison. Toss in the COVID-era economic injury loans, where up to $200 billion was stolen, implying another 2 million felons. So take Minnesota Somalis, multiply by 20-plus blue states, dozens of nationalities. For example, 8 Indian gas stations in Texas got $32 million in SBA loans, in case you wonder why Indians own all these 7-Elevens. Now, long-standing government estimates of fraud run north of $500 billion a year. Elon Musk thinks it's closer to $1.5 trillion, which seems right given what's being exposed. That would be roughly half of income taxes, leading many Americans to suggest perhaps we should stop paying tax until government gets control of the fraud. So as next, the left is responding exactly how you'd expect. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz calls Somali fraud probes, quote, white supremacy, while MSNBC says Trump's making it all up because he is racist. But Shirley has set off a nationwide effort by citizen journalists to expose fraud, incentivized by the fact whistleblowers get 15 to 30% of recoveries in case you are looking for a side gig. 100 million Americans are now pissed off unless they see a lot of people in handcuffs. We're this close to a taxpayer revolt the IRS could not hope to keep up with. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and go to petersanons.com for daily videos and in-depth articles with charts and all the gory details. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.